This week, many well-known conservative attorneys are suddenly saying that they think it likely that Donald Trump will be indicted by the Department of Justice. And while Cassidy Hutchinson's testimony Tuesday seems to have served a serious political blow, especially with Ron DeSantis' meteoric rise in the Republican Party, I still don't see how it changes that much legally for Donald Trump. And I still don't believe, based on what we know today, that Trump will be indicted by the DOJ. But some big players like Alberto Gonzales, who served as Attorney General under George W. Bush, are now saying they think so.
He knew the crowd was dangerous. He encouraged the crowd to go to the Capitol. And he knew the crowd was armed, and he knew the purpose of the what was going on in Congress, which is to certify the electoral college count. And I think one might make the argument that there's certainly the beginnings of a case for seditious conspiracy, obstruction of Congress. So there are some things here that I think certainly Merrick Garland is going to look at, in addition to witness tampering. That's something that's also a crime. So there is a lot there. I have to believe that folks in the Trump world are very concerned. They're very nervous right now.
That's a big statement today from a former Republican Attorney General of the United States. And he's not alone. Saul Weisenberg, a Fox News legal analyst and former deputy to Ken Starr, told the New York Times, quote, "This is the smoking gun. There isn't any question this establishes a prima facie case for his criminal culpability on seditious conspiracy charges." And Andy McCarthy, former federal prosecutor, generally conservative, also a Fox News legal analyst, told Mediaite.com's Aidan McLaughlin that after Tuesday's testimony, he too believes the former president is looking at charges.
Trump was clearly aware just moments before he took the podium that you had a mob of heavily armed people. The critical things he says there are, they're not here to hurt me, which it implies that in his mind, he knows they're here to hurt someone. And the second thing he says, they can come in, they can hear me, and then they can march to the Capitol. So he's very aware that you have a mob that's armed to the teeth that he is planning to encourage to march on the Capitol. That knowledge opens up the possibility that you could prosecute for aiding and abetting the intimidation of federal officials, which is a pretty serious crime.
Do you expect that we're going to see Trump prosecuted by the Justice Department on any of these charges?
I do now, yeah.
These aren't alarmist left-leaning pundits who you see on cable news who've long ago proclaimed Trump guilty of everything from obstruction to sedition. These are sober, principled, right-leaning legal analysts telling the Trump team, look out. Although, make no mistake, there are plenty on the left still calling for the cuffs to be slapped on Donald Trump.
We are talking about an armed attack on the seat of government with multiple people in Trump's orbit saying, admitting in public their goal was to overthrow the election, but he also asked them to let in the armed people. And I don't care whether you're the President of the United States or a random agent, you do not let armed people in. The magnetometers are there for a reason, and that alone would seem to be an illicit order.
Look, I understand how badly the left wants to see Trump indicted. I'm certainly not going to defend his actions. But the DOJ prosecuting a former president is a monumental event. And the standard is really high. You better have unambiguous evidence of intent to commit a particular crime. And regardless of whether he should or shouldn't, I haven't seen anything yet that suggests the DOJ is ready to go there. But joining us now is Joseph Moreno. He's a former federal prosecutor who worked under both the Bush and Obama administrations. Also with us on the phone is Harry Litman. He, too, a former U.S. attorney and official for the Department of Justice, now legal affairs columnist for the L.A. Times. Gentlemen, thank you both very much for coming on the show. Appreciate it. All right, Joseph, let me start with you. I was surprised to see all of these very serious right-leaning analysts either saying that they think he should be indicted or that he will be indicted. What do you think?
Well, Dan, to your point, I mean, those are two different things, right? Look, I think like many people, I intently watched Ms. Hutchinson's testimony this week, and it was highly damning testimony. Putting aside some of the weak spots about the hearsay that I think they went a little too far with. Having now had 48 hours to digest it, I remain skeptical. And the biggest reason is that, look, if the Justice Department was going to bring charges against President Trump, why haven't they done it yet? I mean, they don't need to wait for Congress. They've had a year and a half here. So that, to me, is the number one reason why I remain skeptical that this would have been done a long time ago if they had a case.
Yeah, I share your concern. Harry Litman, I share your perspective. Harry Litman, you see it a little differently?
Yeah, I do. So first on the timing issue, look, Dan, they had the biggest investigation in DOJ history going through hundreds of folks, and that was methodical, and they only within the last couple months had a grand jury to look at these charges. That's in terms of timing. But in terms of substance and evidence, I do think Hutchinson's a real game changer. Look, a crime, as you know, as Joseph knows, is the combination of a bad act and a bad state of mind. To date, we were asking whether Trump had guilty intent vis-a-vis delaying the proceedings. Now, after Cassie Hutchinson, we're talking about force and violence. And when you talk about force and violence, you talk about seditious conspiracy and you talk about inciting a riot. And as Joseph says, there's just no doubt that he does know about it. In fact, more than that, he really wants to kind of lead the charge.
But let me add, but you say the force and violence, I'm still not seeing that, meaning the fact that he knows. Let's assume everything she said is true, right? Let's assume that he had said that he knew that there were people with weapons there and that they were going to go to the Capitol, right? That doesn't necessarily, in and of itself, cross the line, right, to force and violence. No, I disagree. Why?
No, I think it does if it's something he wants to happen. That would be now. I mean, you could get to intent, but we know for
wants isn't enough legally. Wants isn't enough legally. Just because he wants something to happen, that doesn't make it a crime.
Well, actually, it's pretty close to it because this is a seditious conspiracy offense. Same thing as Tario has had. So if he's made an agreement and the agreement is to go forward.
You just took a big leap. He made an agreement. Wait. I mean, now you're talking about making an agreement. That's a new point here. And this is the problem, is that what people do very often in discussing this is they lump together things that Donald Trump shouldn't have done, bad things that he did that day. And the very specifics, and Harry, you know this stuff as well as anybody. I mean, the very specifics that are required for this sort of crime. And when it comes to the former president of the United States, you're not going to blur over these distinctions. You're going to have to overcome each and every one of these technicalities. And I'm with Joseph on this, in that the Department of Justice hasn't shown anything up to this point which has indicated that they're going to go there.
Well, has been shown. All right, so give me another shot here. So look, on both, the reason for force and violence that I insist on it's just a statutory term. It's the statutory term both in seditious conspiracy and in inciting a riot. The most serious charges that the Proud Boys, et cetera, were convicted of. Right. And I'm saying now that Trump he's now looking to be on the hook for that kind of event. Now let's go to just DOJ, your point, Joseph's point. Oh, they haven't done it yet. Of course they haven't done it yet. They are working their way up. All roads lead through, say, Meadows. They need Cipollone, et cetera. But I feel fairly confident that when the time comes to be at the table, there will be a responsible, respected voice who'll say, how can we not do this? I mean, really, how can we not do this? Everything you say on the other side, and Joseph says is correct, but it's not evidentiary. It's
right, but I think it's actually going to be, Joseph, the exact opposite conversation, which is not going to be how can we not do this? It's going to be how can we do this? The standard is going to be, Joseph, I think, this is a really big deal. Really, really, really big deal. And are we going to go there? And I still think DOJ is not. And I don't think the question is going to be, how can we not?
All right, so
let me ask Joseph.
Don't get me wrong.
Well,
let me let Joseph respond. Yeah, go ahead, Joseph.
I get Harry's point, right, that the DOJ has brought 800 cases against individuals who stormed the Capitol. But they didn't need to do that because none of those cases lead to Donald Trump, right? I mean, so yes, the courts are filled with those cases, but those are not the people that are going to lead to the president. So that's not really, I think one leads to the other. The other thing is, too, look, this is what Congress should have done a year and a half ago. This is a highly delayed, this is the impeachment investigation that never happened. So that was the mechanism for doing this. And that was the mechanism for bringing effectively impeachment and then an impeachment trial against the president. Now, a year and a half later, using the Department of Justice, I don't know, again, color me skeptical. We're closer maybe than we were a week ago. Yep. I still think it's less likely than not.
Here's where the danger is. The fake electors are a real problem. Those people, I think, are in real danger right now. I think that the fact that they've raided the home of Clark, that they took Eastman's phone, those are big deals. That's not Donald Trump himself. I also think that these possible witness intimidation charges, or at least claims, with regard to Cassidy Hutchinson could be a big deal. And there's new reporting tonight which suggests that Mark Meadows, "Let me know you have your deposition tomorrow," was a note that was sent to her, along with a sort of warning he knows you're loyal. That could be another potential legal avenue. But none of this means Donald Trump necessarily gets indicted. But that's, from my perspective, as of what we know today. So we shall see. Joseph Moreno and Harry Litman, thank you. Appreciate it. Thank you for watching. Go to newsnationnow.com to find NewsNation on your cable provider. And don't forget to click the red subscribe button below to get more of NewsNation's fact-driven, unbiased coverage.